but they've got a presupposition. The other people would tell you, if you read the Bible, it talks about a worldwide flood. Maybe those layers were deposited in the flood, and the canyon was carved when the waters retreated from the continents. Both of them use presuppositions. The one just uses the presupposition that your current rate of processes must be used to explain what you see over there, while the others would use the Bible. Okay, here's another example. If I were to get two volunteers, the one I would give the red pair of glasses and the other one the green one, and I were to hold up a white paper, would they give me the same answer as to the color of that paper?
No.
No, the one would say no, it looks a bit green, the other one would say it looks a bit red. You agree with me? Based on the glasses or the filters they've got on. It's the same thing when it comes to interpreting geology or earth science evidence or data. We've got two main presuppositions, and we've talked about this today. The first one, I just want to go back, since we're talking about the genesis of geology. This guy is Selah-Dino. He was from some European country, I can't remember now. He lived in the 17th century, and he's widely regarded as one of the fathers of modern geology. He published this, some Latin dissertation. I'm not going to try and read the title for you, but in this dissertation he gave 4 principles or laws that are still in use today. The first one, it talks about the law of presupposition. When you've got sedimentary layers stacked on top of each other, the bottom one is always older than the next one, So your top layer would be the youngest, the bottom layer would be the oldest. You agree? That's how the law of superposition works. Then there's a law of cross-cutting discontinuities. If you've got a sequence of sedimentary layers, you've got a fault cutting through, or a dike, volcanic material, obviously that had to have happened after the deposition of the layers. It makes sense? And then there are a few others which are, the third one I'm just going to highlight. If you've got sedimentary rocks that are tilted vertically, we often find that in the geological record. That also had to have happened after it was deposited, because deposition always happens horizontally. So it's, what is it called? The original horizontality, that's what it is called. Anyways, this guy was a Bible believer. In his fancy dissertation he said, but the similarity of matter and form in the strata, what does strata mean? It means layers, geological layers, the sedimentary layers. The layers of mountains which are different and distant from each other proves that the fluid was universal. What universal fluid is he referring to?
Flood.
Noah's flood, based on the Bible. So these guys back in the day believed the Bible to be true, and that was the worldview through which they interpreted geological evidence. So we can call it catastrophism, based on the biblical catastrophe of Noah. But this was the ruling paradigm until the 18th century, when the middle 18th century, when this guy was born, James Hutton. He was a Scottish physician, I believe, and he published an interesting book in 1785 called The Theory of the Earth. Now this guy, he was a deist, I think. He didn't believe the Bible. He had some weird ideas. And in this book he said, the past history of our globe must be explained by what can be seen to be happening now. No powers are to be employed that are not natural to the globe. What does it mean? That are not supernatural. So he had a bit of a hidden agenda to move away from the supernatural explanations in the Bible to just using the natural processes that we can see. And he was very influential, and he managed to advocate his theory. But then in the same year, 1797, when he died, let me go to this slide. Charles Lyell was born, and he took his theories further, because Charles Lyell was a lawyer, and every one of us who knows lawyers, we know they are smooth talking. And they must be smooth talking because they need to convince the judge of their case. So he took the theories further. Let me just go back to this slide. This is what is now known as Hutton's unconformity. Now, an unconformity in geological terms means that you've got a sequence of sediments, but then there was a break in the timeline before the next sequence of sediments were deposited. You can see there, let me get this, I hope I've got it won't work there. You can see the layers at the bottom here are all tilted semi-vertically. You can see that. And from the law of original horizontality that we've just discussed, we know that these layers were once deposited horizontal. So there was a period when it was deposited, it was tilted vertically, and then it got eroded up to that plane over there before there was a next sequence of sediments that were deposited on top of it. Now James Hutton, him and a friend of him got in a boat and they got out east of Edinburgh in Scotland, and they visited this place and they had a look, and he started thinking, and he thought to himself, listen, sedimentation happens underwater because sediments are transported down into the ocean and it slowly settles out and it forms layers. Where does erosion happen? Above sea level, where you've got rain and wind and sun, weathering material, and it gets transported down through the rivers, down into the ocean. So erosion happens above sea level, sedimentation happens below sea level. So the bottom sediments had to have been deposited underwater, then it was tilted, but then it was eroded down to a flat level. So it means that it had to have been extremely above sea level. And then there was another sequence of sedimentation. So when he looked at this, he thought this was an endless cycle of erosion and sedimentation. And he just thought there's no way that you could fit what happens here in the 6,000-year biblical history that they were taught to believe. But he used the presupposition that the rates had to have been uniform. So obviously, based on this evidence and the explanation that he attached to it, he managed to persuade many people. And as I said, Charles Lyell was the guy who basically advocated this theory. We'll get to it later on, the theory of uniformitarianism. Charles Lyell, he published this Principles of Geology, which is a landmark publication in geology. And if you can read the fine print there, it says, being an attempt to explain the former changes of the Earth's surface by reference to causes that are now in operation. Is the flood of Noah now in operation? No, it's not in operation. So, the flood of Noah is not allowed to be used as an explanation for what we see now on the structure of the earth. Does it mean that the flood of Noah did not happen? No, it does not mean. So he is excluding it by default. So this is where the modern secular geology was born. Let me show you the hidden agenda or the bias of these guys who doubted the Bible. On the eve of publishing his Principles of Geology, he wrote in a letter to a friend, he said, I'm sure you may get into the quarterly review what will free the signs from Moses. You get that? Okay. Who wrote Genesis? Moses. For if treated seriously, the church party are quite prepared for it. I conceived the idea 5 or 6 years ago that if ever the Mosaic geology, can you see the reference to the flood there, could be put down or set down without giving offense, it would be an historical sketch. So, do you think he was objective in his way, in his approach to interpreting geology? No, certainly not. Okay, so on the one hand, we've got the, let's call it the green filters, the green glasses, the biblical presupposition, which is called catastrophism. And on the other hand, we've got the Bible doubters, we call them. They believe the present is the key to the past. The present rates of sedimentation and erosion is the key to explain the past. It's called uniformitarianism. The rates must be uniform. Another word is gradualism. So the one guy looks at the Grand Canyon. He says, wow, look what a little water did over lots of time. The other guy looks at it and he comes to a different conclusion. He said, wow, look what lots of water did over little time. So who's right? You remember my court case? It's the same evidence. It's only the interpretations that differ. Why does it differ? Based on our presuppositions. So we are left in geology and as Christians to interpret Genesis, but also to interpret what we see in the geological record. And this is very important. So first of all, when we interpret Genesis, obviously Scripture is used to interpret Scripture. So we can go to the rest of the Bible and use the Berean approach, as they call it. You know, when Paul preached the gospel, the Bereans, they were the ones that measured what he said based on what is written in the Bible. So Genesis says, and God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. This is what happened in day 3, to get back to day 3. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. Again, God saw that it was good. Just a side note on the day-age theory. Many people would say these days of Genesis are many, many ages. But it's difficult to get away from the fact that Genesis specifically states it was morning and it was evening the first day. It was morning, it was evening the second day. So, how do you fit millions of years into morning and into evening? It's just impossible to do that. So that to me is a clear-cut case.
Yeah.
Anyways. On day 3, if you look at the earth, does it look like the dry land was separated from the waters? It looks like it. Okay, so if you look at the earth currently, it appears as if God created it that way. Okay? So we can accept that. But what if I told you that we found on these continents, we find many sedimentary layers with fossils in them? Did God create the fossils in the layers like that? I would say no, because at the end of creation, God said it was very good. It was good. God didn't create dead creatures in the ground. So something must have happened after creation, right, to have deposited these fossils in the sedimentary layers. The rest of day 3, and God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the whole herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after its kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. So if we look at the original creation, God said it was very good. It was perfect. It's paradise, as we know, the Garden of Eden. No death, no suffering, no pain whatsoever. But this is not what we find today. Just to link to that, Romans 5:12 says, wherefore as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin. So before sin there was no death. And so death passed unto all men, for that all have sinned. What do we find today? We find sedimentary layers with millions of dead things, fossils, representing death, suffering, and disease. God didn't create it that way. That we can gather from Genesis, when we interpret Genesis. So as I said, something must have happened to have formed it that way. Or God is a liar. That's the other alternative. Exactly. Now, when we interpret geology, we have to do it as biblical believers through the eyes of Genesis. And this is what we're going to link on into in the next talk. In closing, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, Genesis 7, where it talks about the flood of Noah. And all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and of cattle and of beast and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man. So, I asked myself, if the flood of Noah was a reality, what evidence would I expect to find? And I should have never asked myself that question, because once I did, my eyes opened. This is my question that leads to the next talk. Can we see the evidence? We're going to stop here, because the next talk we will talk about the evidence. So if you want to hear about the evidence and the way we interpret it from a biblical perspective, be sure to be in the next talk on Thursday. Thank you.